It's your girl, Jackie O. How's it going, O Squad? If this is your first time to my channel, don't forget to subscribe and also hit that like button. Help a sister out. It's right. Like, hit that like button. Just please do it for me. So, I am Jackie O. I am the OG, original Black digital nomad and globetrotting mama. I have been crisscrossing this globe for the last 25 years, actually over 25 years. And that's why I call myself an original, because guys, you don't get to claim OG status unless you've been doing this for a good minute. And I got decades in this travel game, and I'm so excited to connect with each and every one of you all. Currently, I slow travel full time with my toddler daughter, Ruth. Now, what the heck is slow traveling? We spend between 6 months to a year in one particular country, just getting to know it, going deep, doing all that. And it is amazing to show my toddler daughter the world. And my whole channel, blog, vlog, all of it is dedicated to inspiring, motivating, informing, and most importantly, educating other Black women about how to travel full time and or move abroad, because this lifestyle is possible for anyone. And I definitely want to see more sisters out there. It doesn't matter if you're single, married with kids, or somewhere in between. This lifestyle is possible for you. And this is my show in which I interview fabulous Black women who are doing the most all over this globe. And today I am taking you guys to Iceland. Yeah, y'all, Iceland. Black people are everywhere, and we got a fabulous New Yorker sister with locks who is absolutely gorgeous, who is doing all things Iceland. She actually married an Icelander, but even before she moved to Iceland for love, that sister had herself a job. She was making her own money, and she was just doing the most. So I find her amazing, fascinating. Her Instagram feed is all that because she is educating the world about Iceland, which to me is just such a beautiful country that a lot of people just don't know a lot about. I probably visited there maybe 10 years ago, 10 years ago. She gave me the tea. It has changed a lot. And that's wonderful to know. And I can't wait to take baby Ruth there. But y'all stay tuned, listen to this interview, learn, be inspired, post questions. Let me know if there's another country where you're interested in hearing the story of a sister from, and I will reach out to one and bring her on this show and interview her. And let's do this, y'all. Let's do this together. What's up, O Squad? How's everybody doing today? Welcome to Black Women Doing the Most. And each and every time I record this podcast/vlog, I just get blown away by the just wow factor of the women that I get to interview. I'm probably gonna be 90 years old. We're probably gonna be doing holograms, and I'm still gonna be doing this because I'm like, well, God damn, there's some amazing sisters out there. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing a Black woman who not only is gorgeous, but she is doing the most in Iceland, y'all. You heard me, Iceland. And when they say Black women can do the most anywhere in the world, it is so utterly true. I was scrolling through her Instagram. She also has a podcast. She's educating people. I was sitting there putting words into Google, the pronunciation, because I was like, well, how exactly do you say this word? And I love the fact that she is opening up places that a lot of people like me, loyal me, coming from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, growing up, I don't even know if I knew where Iceland was. Maybe I did, probably not. But now I look at her and I'm like, she's a role model for my daughter, that my daughter knows that she can do it. She can go anywhere in the world. So I'm going to give her a chance to introduce herself, because I try to do the most when I introduce my guests, but I never do them justice. So I'm going to pass the mic to her, let her say a little bit about herself, and we will get into a conversation. Go on, girlfriend.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. You did a great job, honestly. I was like, ooh, that sounds really interesting. That's awesome. So, I'm originally from New York. City, specifically Brooklyn, New York, born and raised, lived there for 30 years, except for the like 4 years I went to college. And now I've been in Iceland for 4 years. And that was not my life plan. Let's just put it like that. Right? It wasn't that like of the places in the world that I thought I would be going or possibly living. Iceland was not the number one place. It just so happens that I met and fell in love with an Icelander while I was living in the US. Yeah. And he said, by the way, I plan on moving back to Iceland when I'm done like with school here. And it was like, okay, that sounds really fun. Like I have no idea what I'm talking about, right? Like I'm just like, Iceland sounds like it would be an adventure. That's what I'm gonna make it, right? And so in my head, it's always been this adventure that I'm on, and it's never stopped in essence. So like, I feel very fortunate to have secured a job before coming here, which really for me was a big part of allowing myself to feel more secure and making such a big leap in life to move to another country, especially one that I didn't know much about beforehand.
So I want to go into that a little bit because I know there are a lot of people who are like, well, yeah, there's countries that may fall into their lap per se that like were not in the radar. Like, you know, sometimes I talk to guests and they're like, yeah, I dreamed my whole life about living in Paris or living in Rome, blah, blah, blah. But Iceland, like you're a New Yorker. Like for most New Yorkers, New York is the center of the universe. Like so I just want to talk a little bit about like openness and being open to the prospect of like you gonna follow a guy that you're in love with to his country. And can you just tell us a little bit about that and like what the process you went through?
To be honest, it didn't feel that hard. I think because we were so in love, and we are still so in love. To be fair, I'm still with him, so it's not like together. I know I'm like phrasing it kind of weirdly, but at the time, it's like you're so in love with the person, and you're really not thinking through like, oh, all the difficulties. And I had visited like 5 times at least before moving and met his family, and that's what made me feel the most comfortable, was that his family was so accepting, so kind, and just a lot of fun. And they were happy, and they were telling him like, don't mess this up, like like,
they knew.
So I think that in general made me feel comfortable. And then the whole getting a job thing, right? And it was in a career that I already had. So I work in digital marketing, and it was great that I was able to then get a job in marketing at this adventure tourism company. So I didn't feel like I feel like I'd set myself up in a way that made me feel comfortable. And that made like mentally not feeling like I was coming here and restarting my life. But yeah, this is a new journey for me for sure. And even like going to a new company can be a lot of anxiety and whatever else that comes along with just meeting all these new people. But there was just this certainty that this was the right step for me in life. And I've always still felt that even as I'm going through things now with, how things are going in the US, especially with how much is bubbling up around, oppression of Black people over the last 450 years, and that coming now to Iceland and having those kind of conversations. And I guess we can get into that later. But even with that happening here, I still feel very much like this was the right place for me to be. And I think I'm in a unique position to be able to share and also like learn at the same time because of the way I look and my background, but also because I'm a foreigner here. So I'm super curious, and I get a chance to ask questions and be like, I'm coming at it, as a beginner, as a perspective that way. And it allows me kind of into the society in a way that an Icelander wouldn't be able to do.
And one of the things I noticed is so amazing about like your Instagram account and just how you have you have dove into like Iceland. Like, and I see you like knitting, I see you with like Icelandic sweaters, like you just go through like the whole gamut. And was that something that you've always been that way, that when you go into something, you go like full in and you just embrace it? Or just tell us a little bit about that.
Oh yes. My mom I've always been that person. Maybe you need to calm down a little bit. It's like, no, I'm excited. Like I just get so enthusiastic about topics. And the hard part though is keeping up with, all the expectations you have of yourself for something. So I know for you, for instance, right? Like you've got your vlog, you've got your podcast, you have a child, you have traveling. Like there's just so many things that you're enthusiastic about too. And sometimes it could just be your brain has it all figured out, but your body's like, we should be resting. Like, why are we trying literally to do everything, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's been my main thing is just learning how to pace myself with my activities. I never intended to learn how to knit because I already know how to crochet.
Okay.
And that it was also like a trial by fire, right? I learned how to crochet one year because I didn't have a lot of money, and I was like, well, I'm gonna make all my family gifts this year. And I
Oh, I love
chose
it.
like
Okay.
I'm gonna make hats and scarves and stuff. And I was like, what am I doing? So that's always how I've been. And coming here was like I ended up getting involved with this Reykjavík knitting festival,
Okay.
and they asked me to be one of the organizers, and I was like, okay. And I was like, but I don't know how to knit. And they're like, no problem, we're gonna teach you. And I was like, well, I guess I'm knitting now, right? So it's just so,
I love it.
so it's been and I just genuinely find Iceland so fascinating, and it's given me a lot, like the nature here and the people that have like been so open to me. I feel a sense of gratitude for that. And it also is hard knowing that like not everybody gets this type of opportunity
Mhm.
or access to this information. So for me, it's like, why would I hold on to it and keep it for myself when other people are just as curious as I am and would love to be able to learn this. And they also, when they come, or if they ever just, want to stay interested and connected to Iceland in some way, they now have a resource for it.
Yeah, no, I so applaud you because I think, I mean, just you, just your visual and then your story and then like just everything. Now I want to go backtrack because again, I like you are a New Yorker. I love New
Yeah.
Yorkers, love all my New Yorkers, but moving from what New York is like 7 million to
I think it's more
moving
than that even.
like to moving to Iceland, which is a small country,
There's
particularly outside of the capital. Like
60,000 altogether. Yeah.
yeah. Like, what was that transition like for you, especially for people who are like, maybe I will leave like the Chicagos, the San Franciscos, the New York, and come to like a country that whole population may not be the size of their city.
Right. Exactly. I used to joke with people. I'm like, the amount of people who live here live on my block in New York City. And they're like, really? I'm like, no. But still, it's just like it's so small in comparison. And yeah, I was ready though, meaning mentally I was sick of being jammed into a subway car with
Mm-hmm.
people. And I lived and grew up in Bushwick in
Okay. Yep.
particular. So Bushwick in the 80s and 90s, 2000s, like early 2000s, people did not want to live there. There was a lot of crime, there were drugs, there was so much that was unappealing and scary to people, to the point where like when I was growing up, I was thinking, I would want to at some point not live here, because it'd be nice to know what it's like to live in places where people actually want to be, right? Meaning like where people are like,
Yep.
it's sought after. And then I leave, or I'm in the process of leaving, and now it's like one of those like hot neighborhoods or something.
Uh-huh.
But in terms of transitioning, I was so mentally ready because I'd been to Iceland and there was fresh air, it's clean, like the streets are clean,
Mm-hmm.
and if I were to get on the bus, I get a seat. Like it's just
It's a little things that
it's
really
little
matter.
things
Yeah.
we take for granted. And Reykjavik, yes, it is a very small city. It's easily walkable. Like there's parts to it that make it super appealing, but then you're just like, I can't get this certain type of food here. I can't get, this fresh vegetables very often because they have to import a lot of stuff unless they're growing it here in Iceland. They don't grow a ton of things and they don't have the capacity for that at the moment. So it's just like there are a lot of technical cons, but for me, the pros were just so great. And also, like I mentioned, I got a chance to be introduced to nature in such an amazing way because of working with this company who really were like passionate about being in nature. Like these are mountaineers and stuff. So people who were like hardcore, nature is everything, leave work at 3:30 because the weather's good and you don't take the weather in Iceland for granted. So like that. But I never thought of it as like I'm moving to Iceland to have a life like New York City. I never that was not it. If I wanted something like that, I would move to London or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And that was another thing. I didn't want to go to a place like London because I didn't want that same experience. I already know what it's like to live in a huge city. I already know what it's like to be, racing after your dream and like 20 other people definitely you can see or after your dream, and maybe another 100,000 are like, oh, maybe I'll try that. It's like everybody's gunning after the same things. It literally is a place that never sleeps because it's just a competitive landscape that you kind of can't escape if you're in it, and once you escape it, you're like, oh, life is different. I mean, granted, I'm still very ambitious. I still have a sort of New York attitude, but I allow myself, times where it's just like, I can take a break. Okay, I can it doesn't have to be that hard. It doesn't have to be that ridiculous. I don't have to be that stressed.
And I love the fact that like there's so much intention in what you said. Like you knew you mentally were at a space where you were like, you know what, I'm ready for something different and I'm going to embrace that differentness because I know what New York is like. I know what being, and I told you, like the center of the universe, I know what that's like and I want something different. And I think that's a very good message for my audience to listen to because so much of what I hear when I talk to women who are interested in moving abroad is just that fear of that something different, that something new, and just stepping into that and being okay with it not being what you grew up with. Like,
oh yeah,
yeah.
I had to also change my mind around what it meant to exist as a Black woman now in a different space.
Okay.
Because being a Black person in Iceland is not the same as being a Black person in the United States and being a Black person in New York City. It's just like there's so different mentalities around race and just I had to reprogram too. It wasn't just like I came and everyone just has to accept that, how I was in the United States is how everything has to be in Iceland, for instance, right? So there was like being willing and open to growth yourself and also being uncomfortable because there are plenty of times where I still get uncomfortable. Like I'm still practicing Icelandic as much as I can.
No, that's a tough language.
It is. We're doing a month, like right now we're only speaking in Icelandic for the month of July. And yeah, it's just like lots of deep breaths, taking my time, trying to think. But for me, it's worth it, right? And this is like the stuff that keeps me going because I need stuff to keep me stimulated. Like you, I'm sure, right? Like you just have so many interests. And when it gets boring, that's when you start to, I think nitpick at things that really aren't issues. It's like you have to kind of keep yourself in a space where you're enjoying it. And it doesn't have to be so hard all the time. It could just be fun challenges, that like actually stimulate your brain and allow you to grow.
Now let's talk a little bit about, because you mentioned it and I want to explore it a little bit because especially, in the US right now, Blackness and the idea of Blackness and identity. And I ask all my guests this question to like some extent, because I know that I've talked to guests who, particularly now during like Black Lives Matter, feel like survivor's guilt. There are guests who have expressed issues, concerns with like family members saying they like fled the United States and like some kind of way that if you leave the United States for whatever reason, you left for love, which I think is like so beautiful and pure, but like that's Jackie doing on her own little rant. like feel like if you leave the United States in some kind of way, you're not Black American. Your Blackness is some kind of way has like a stain, a scarlet letter on it, for lack of a better way to articulate what I'm saying. And I just like to know kind of the feelings and what you're processing. I have my very own strong opinions. Obviously, they're probably in line with some of your thoughts because like that's the reason I travel full time. But I would love to just hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I do not believe your Blackness or your identity is diminished because you left the United States. And everyone, has their own way of defining themselves, and they should be very much allowed to do it that way. And I'm not going to judge another person, but for them to project that all people who are Black Americans who leave the United States are now this is the same thing we're fighting against, right? It's like, why are we grouping a whole lot of people into this is who you are now because of, how I see you or how I feel that you should be. Have I felt guilt about living in a place where I feel safe? Absolutely, because I have family and friends and then people that I don't know. And I think that was the point about, for me, a lot of the videos that I've seen about people being killed by the police or white vigilantes or whatever, is that these are people you don't know and yet you feel so connected to because it easily could be someone it could have been you, right? And it's so heartbreaking. So to say that like, for whatever reason, like my Black American card somehow gets revoked for leaving the country. It's like, no, we all are in this and we're all dealing with it in the ways that we need to based off of our circumstances. In Iceland, like I've definitely just been trying to figure out other ways of how I can be a good supporter of what's happening with Black Lives Matter. And part of that is like being vocal, right? So on my podcast, on my Instagram, on YouTube. I've made videos, I've talked about it, knowing that there's a possibility that I was going to get criticized, that people might stop following me, that like whatever else. But for me, it's worth it, right? And then also to shine a light on what's happening here and not to pretend like I live in this utopia. I don't, like, and it's an episode that I have coming up very soon. Actually, I'm hoping it come out this week, where I talked to a doctor of anthropology, so a PhD in anthropology here. She's a professor. And she specifically has been writing about and researching about in Iceland for the last like decade or more, whiteness, racism, and Nordic exceptionalism in Iceland. And so this was like eye-opening. We talked for an hour and a half, and I was just like, whoa, I was not expecting all of these insights and learning about Iceland this way, because when I came here, was like, I feel great. I feel like people were treating me well. I'm not like being called names, and I don't feel like people were like, refusing me service or anything like that. So I didn't really put it into context of like history. And even though Iceland did not have slaves or didn't take part in that, they were technically like a colony of the Danish, even though not the same as like St. Croix, like very different. At the same time, they were very poor and considered uncivilized, and they tried and they used, racism in their media and whatever else to distinguish themselves from other colonies or from other places that people might consider to be savage or uncivilized. So like, I was like learning about like those dynamics that you're, going to, but anyway, so I'm not gonna go too much into that because you're.
No, this is like fascinating. And like people like, I'm so fascinated with like just history and how we get to like the present. And I think it's important to understand that. And I really have a newfound respect for you because you're in this country and you're actually, well, and not the United States, not Guatemala, but in Iceland, and you're like truly learning like the history of it, which I don't even know if all Icelandic people would know that much of it.
They don't, and that's the thing that's like, for me, it's like the need to shine a light on all of it, and we all have our own ways of doing it, and that's what I guess I'm trying to get around to, is that to claim that I'm less than something because I've no longer lived there, or I don't belong in the group anymore because I don't live there. And that's a shame, because you're in essence silencing other people's experiences, and you're silencing the fact that like you can be a Black American that's an expat that lives in this other place, and you have feelings and strong connections to where you were born and all the circumstances and maybe oppression that you've encountered or whatever else, but you also have this newfound experience that is also worthwhile and necessary for other Black Americans to hear about, because maybe this is an opportunity for you to get to experience that if you were, if you're part of the Black American group that hasn't left the United States or whatever. And not that we need to, it's like, that is, if you feel like you need to get out, that is your choice to do, and I hope you're able to do that. If you feel like I'm staying and I need to fight this, also I support that, right? So it's like, we need to be in a space of more of support rather than suppression, because we're locking down ideas, and we're also creating areas where Black people don't do blah blah.
Yep.
And that's what I grew up, with. It's like, we don't camp, sleeping outside for homeless people, right? It was just like, and I
exactly
here it was like, camping, I don't want to do that, right? It was like, granted, I'm not that skilled at camping. We need better mats and stuff because I was tired, but still, the idea that like I allowed myself to camp. And it was so freeing. And I was just like, why are we in this headspace where like Black people don't hike mountains or don't swim? And it's just like, stop it. Just let all of that go. And I think sometimes moving to another place is really just like, you shed parts of yourself that were so limiting, and you still get to, you have your identity, but you build on it. And now you build this other part of yourself and I think that's why it's important for people like yourself who are sharing these stories, because other people get to realize they don't have to be one type of Black American, whatever that means, or Black woman or something like that. And I don't subscribe to that. I never have. And I didn't even know that I didn't subscribe to it until, getting older and realizing that people were boxing me in. And I had to create my, and control my own narrative.
No, and I couldn't agree with you. Like everything you said, I'm like, yes, girl, yes. It comes out a little odd on like podcasts, but I'm like, yes, girl, yes. And I'm like, my soul sister right here. Like, we've never met in person, but like, I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm glad that it came from your mouth as opposed to me, because people who listen to me all the time know I say this like over and over again. There is no one way to do Blackness. And like, if anything, our ancestors who were slaves wanted us to have choices. And the only reason you have choices is by knowing about opportunities that are available to you.
Absolutely.
And going out and living the best life that you could possibly live. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about like, what is it like being a Black person in Iceland?
Yeah, it is varied.
Okay.
Also, right? Like, so I've heard different stories. For me, when I first came, I definitely noticed when I first started living here, because when I was visiting, it's so different. Like, your mind is so different or whatever. But once you're settling into a place, there are patterns that you start to recognize. And being stared at is one of them. That's real. Like, it's happened. I'm sure it happens to a lot of people in different places. I wasn't used to it just because, like, when I was in the downtown Reykjavík area, like, I lived like 15 minutes away from that by car. So I am in like the suburbs basically. And so it is like, oh yeah, and if you go to like the grocery store, like little kids have their mouths open, like, you know, like, what is here? You know, like, is that chocolate? Such like interesting reactions that you see. But people have just mostly, they're curious, right? And that has been, I think, one of the most fun parts, is that I don't mind people asking questions. I'd rather you ask questions than assume about me, such and such, right? Like, if you're curious about my hair, we can talk about it. You know, I've not had people disrespect me and like come tug on my hair or anything weird like that. But that I actually know people who that is different, and they have had people touch their hair and they have felt like they were entitled to do stuff like that, right? I've had people who I've met and they were called names and derogatory names. And one girl in particular, she was walking down the street and some guy yelled from a car that she was a monkey. And, you know, yeah, exactly. So it's just like, you're going to find racism anywhere you go. In fact, it was actually just recently, there was an incident where there's a Black Icelander. So he's maybe a little bit lighter than I am. And he and his mom were on the Snæfellsnes Ness Peninsula. And they actually own land there. And they found a note on their car at one of the stops that says, like, if you're Black or brown, get out of this town or something. And it was written in English. And it was just like, what? You know, like he is Icelandic. Yeah. Right? It was so ignorant and so stupid. And a lot of people have been condemning it. And like, this is the kind of things we need, right? It's like everyone come down and be like, no, we're not dealing with this. And I think because of the current climate, that has shifted a lot. And there is a lot of support for people of color. There are a lot more Icelanders who don't look like the typical white Icelandic that people assume, which is like blonde hair, blue eyes, who are speaking up about their experiences. And so for me, it's been like, it's been a super comfortable experience, and then jolted into like, oh, like everything's happening in the world that is so like everything, you know, is upside down, and really being worried and scared, and also feeling like I'm not a part of this movement because I'm not there, right? And then having to, in my own way, be a part of the movement, so that I felt like I was, you know, sharing experiences and helping people to understand and educating them in a way that I can, given my circumstance and where I'm located. So I would say it's been so mixed, you know, like overall, my personal experience has been really positive, and I hold on to that because I know that is possible for other people, meaning like, I don't think it's just a one-off. I'm not the only person who's ever had good experiences here. Otherwise there would be something really wrong with that, you know? But at the same time, I don't want to ever dismiss or invalidate other people who have had bad experiences and who feel like this isn't the place for them. You know,
now, do you feel that a lot of your experiences, your mostly like positive experiences, have been shaped by the fact that you are a Black American as opposed to a Black African, a Black Caribbean?
I mean, I don't know how they can tell if I don't talk to them, right? So that part, I don't know. It could come down to like, some reason though, having locks here, people really like those. I don't know, they just think it's really cool. So that part, I guess, has worked in my favor. You know, so like, because you never know, right? Like what we were gonna think about it. But then when people do find out I'm from New York City, they definitely love that. They're a fan of that. They're just like, oh, and of course you get the question like, why would you move here?
I love it. I remember when I was in Iceland, I was out at a bar and these two Icelandic guys came up to me and they were like, oh my goodness, there's an Icelandic guy who looks like you. There's two brothers. You have to meet them. They're artists. And I was like, looks like me how? Like, and they're like, Black. But it was like in a friendly way. It wasn't at all like they did not mean to be offensive. They just wanted to meet their two Black Icelandic friends. And like the guys ended up being some kind of musicians in Iceland. And I ended up like talking to him for like 2 hours, like, but it was just so like, you got to just be open, like.
Yeah, exactly. Because like most of the time, in fact, majority of the time that I've found, it's not been like people are trying to make you other. They're actually trying to figure out ways to include you, even if it's like a little different way of doing it. But thank you. So
now I want to like switch it up. We're gonna get a little bit lighter now. But I want to talk a little bit about two things. One, Icelandic food.
Okay.
And two, Icelandic weather. Because I feel like we should give full picture. How you live it, what your life is like. And the one thing I love about you is you told me during our prep call that like you're vegan. And I'm vegetarian. And I know when I went to Iceland, but this is a long time ago, like 8 years ago, like I struggled as a vegetarian there. So I'd love to hear like about Icelandic food. Like I know it's changed in 8 years. Just give us like the 411 on what that's like.
You would be so happy now. It is ridiculously different to the point where like almost every restaurant, including this restaurant called Meat, and they have vegan courses. Right? And the only reason why I know this is it was my mother-in-law's 70th birthday, and they were like, so we're going to a place called Meat, and I was like,
oh,
you want me to come? Like I was just like, you can tell me you don't want me to come. That's okay. And like I'm very close to her, so it was like they're like, no, we checked it out. They have vegan food, and I was like,
really?
salad, and it's like the leftovers that they just use to garnish the food basically. And no, I mean they actually had a well thought out menu and one of the best vegan desserts I've had in the country. And it was I was like, what is going on here? So, and there's an all vegan store.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so like, and even recently I was on Facebook, like maybe half an hour before this call, and I saw they have a new shipment of like a bunch of new things like vegan tortellini and like pizzas and stuff. And I was like, I need to go to this store and give them all my money. It's ridiculous. Like I'm just like, because it's not cheap, right? But that's the variety there's a lot of variety, and there's so much creativity in Iceland for sure, and a lot of entrepreneurship. That's like the biggest thing is that there's an entrepreneurial spirit, and there's this latching on to just being creative. No one here is kind of just like one thing. There are people who like they love to do multiple different things. There's no shame in like the fact that you're a podcaster, a YouTuber, a knitter, like all these different things. I was like, oh great, that you're into that now. You're also an artist. You're also like cool. You're into cycling, like whatever. Like you just kind of get the opportunity to try and do and be whatever. And people seem to be really into that. And they just, for the most part, unless you've been like corrupt or something, but for the most part, they're accepting of like you just switching it up and doing something else. Like there's that not like as much of a stigma. So it's food wise, it's like people just come from the woodwork with a whole bunch of different stuff. Yeah. And it's even now in a restaurant that I believe, I'm pretty sure it's owned by African people who've moved here who have an African restaurant, they call it. I don't know if they're like, basing it on like different countries in Africa or something, but that's literally what they're calling it, like African restaurant. I was like, okay, well,
hey, you know what? There's a space for everybody. You can name it whatever. I'm not mad at that. Like, oh my God, I love that. I love that because I know like if anybody has heard about Iceland, they've probably seen like I know my introduction to Icelandic food was Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and where he was like puffing and blah blah blah, and I was like, well, I can't. I haven't eaten an animal since I was 10. And so I'm so happy that you kind of are conjuring that narrative. And that show was actually one of his older shows. But like the fact that there is a possibility of you eating, like you're eating, like it's and I'm also glad you said Iceland is not cheap either.
You can easily spend more than $100 on meals here, easily. So a day, that's super easy. Unfortunately. I think Goodness and I one time we went out and we spent like it was on pizza. We both had our own individual pizzas. And it was like almost $50. Wow. Like,
okay. the folks got to get ready for that. If like they're coming to Iceland, it's just something you just got to get ready.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not gonna, like you said, like sugarcoating it doesn't help anybody. So there are ways of getting around, like not having to pay as much, like if you're willing to cook a little bit more. But if you're in for the experience where you want to try a lot of different foods, what I found, which is kind of funny,
Mm-hmm.
and if you have the money for it, you get way better deals if you do like the course meals, like the 3-course or 5-course meals. Because sometimes that might be like, let's say it's $100, but then an individual entree might be $30. So it's like if you had 5, courses, it's just like you got to taste almost everything on the menu, or a lot of things on the menu for a bargain if you gotten that on its own. So, and then the alcohol part also super expensive. I don't know if I'm sure it was like that when you came.
It was very expensive. Very expensive.
That has not changed.
Okay. Like I thought that was like $15. I was like, what city am I in? Like,
and the happy hour is like $8 to $10. Like,
that's not happy hour. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not happy. I'm drinking at home. This is ridiculous.
So I feel like we cannot talk about like Iceland without talking about both the weather and the nature. And I'm glad you talked about nature and camping, because when I was in Iceland, that's probably the thing that like truly to me was otherworldly. Like Iceland is a beautiful country. And I found out that Iceland is green and Greenland is not. While I was in Iceland, but it's like gorgeous between like the waterfalls and the rainbows and like the greenness and the fact that you can do like that. I went ice climbing when I was there. I did dry diving. I'm a big diver, but Icelandic water is hella cold, so I did dry diving. But like all these amazing outdoor experiences that you could have in Iceland.
Yeah, it is endless in essence. I mean, like your imagination, if you can imagine, for the most part, there's somebody in Iceland. You can go surfing. Mm-hmm. That's actually something I'm trying to get to this summer. So I would really love to do that, because it's just one of those, like, you gotta, why not, right?
Northern Lights, you got the Northern Lights there, like.
Yeah, exactly. So wintertime, there's a bunch of winter sports. Granted, if you're really into skiing, like, good skiing, you'd have to go north, because in the south part of the country, you can ski, but there's not like really huge slopes or anything. But in the north, it's either you do heli skiing or you got to work for your skiing. So you got to hike up the mountain and then go down. So it's kind of up to you. But yeah, there's just like a variety of things to do here. The weather, though, is it is not for everybody. I'll say that. And also, like, summertime is not the blistering hot summer that people would hope for. It's like 60 degrees Fahrenheit is normally the average in the South, at least. You can go up to, I think we've had maybe up to like 70, and that is a heat wave in Iceland. People are not wearing their clothes. I mean, it's like last year we had an amazing summer. We had a couple of days that ended up being like between, like I think maybe we got up to like 65 or 68 or something. And in the sun, it is really warm. But people were walking around like it was Venice Beach.
No.
No jogging down the street. And I was like, we even went to, it wasn't last weekend, but the weekend before, there's a beach here called Reykjavík, and they imported white sand. Okay. And they literally had people sunbathing. It was 58 degrees, I think, because I had it on my phone. I had it on my Instagram, and I was like
sunbathing with like bikinis and stuff when it's like,
yes, and going into the water because the sea is right there, and like then there was a hot tub, and it was just like, it was amazing actually, because I was just like, no, I'm not doing that. It's too cold, right? Like, but people are yearning so much, and they can't go on their summer vacations to other countries this year. So yeah, but anyway, but with the weather, it's really important to bring layers. Appropriate layers, because especially a waterproof layer, that's like one of the biggest, if it's going to be like just summer. If it's winter, like waterproof / cold windproof and everything, because very easily we can have windstorms, snowstorms, rainstorms. Like, it's just, Iceland in that way is a volatile country when it comes to weather, because the Gulf Stream comes up and warms the country to make it moderate, basically just, it doesn't shift too much out of that zone of being between like, just below freezing and up to 60 degrees, depending on the season. But at the same time, it brings a lot of storms So we end up getting, you know, easily windstorms in the summertime, and then in the wintertime, there's snowstorms that can be really dangerous. And
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
there's some windstorms that can, like the sand from the deserts, if you're driving that area, the wind is so strong, it can rip the paint off your cars with the sand. Yeah, it's just like, and so
Oh.
go to like rent a car, they have like this sand insurance that you can buy. Because it does actually happen. There was one time where like there was hail and it broke a bunch of windows, and it was like, you know, like softball type hail. It broke a bunch of windows. So that is kind of life in Iceland in a nutshell. I know it sounds really scary, but I think it's more of just like a reality. And if people use, I always say use safetravel.is, because that's a website that basically tells you the warnings about road closures or weather in certain areas of the country. So if you're planning to go there and it says, don't go, don't go. Right? Like they're not trying to like deter you from having a good time. Right? They're literally trying to save your life. Don't do it.
Now, how has it been being in Iceland during like COVID-19? What was that like? What is it like? It's not over.
Yeah. At first it was scary because it was just like, what is happening? And like, you know, I was mostly afraid for my family in the US. And then like my mother-in-law, she has rheumatoid arthritis. And so that is, you know, also kind of scary because she's afraid of contracting the virus and then getting sick and all sorts of stuff. So I would say for like the elderly populations and stuff here, but for myself, I wasn't that worried. I just was following the rules, trying my best to keep, you know, as mentally balanced as possible, I'll say, because it's just like there's so many things happening. But the government did a really good job of their best, at least when it comes to like figuring out like we should just have these certain rules about gathering bans, washing your hands, whatever. We didn't have to wear masks. We never had to wear masks outside. We still don't.
Oh, interesting.
We did. We did end up flattening the curve. We've had some incidents recently where with people coming from abroad who live in Iceland and they tested negative at the airport, but then 4 or 5 days later, symptoms came up, they tested positive, and then they had to go into quarantine. But then a lot of other people had to be like isolated and stuff. So that resurgence made people nervous, and they realized they needed to enact a new rule, which was if you're a resident, you come to Iceland, you get tested, and then 4 to 5 days later, you get retested. And if you test negative for both of those, then you're okay. For now, that's, you know, but for visitors who are allowed in the country.
Oh, visitors are allowed right now.
Yeah, but it's only from certain countries. So first, Iceland was technically never closed.
Oh.
We were always open to other countries in the Schengen area, which is just like this agreement in Europe of certain countries. And then at some point it was like, okay, now we're going to open it up to these 15 countries outside of the Schengen area. The US, unfortunately, is not one of them because of how badly it's doing with COVID. And like UK, for instance, like they're not, but they had other countries like Tunisia, you know, it's just like, like if you want to make people feel bad, just look at that list. It was like Morocco. It's like, yeah, you can come from Morocco, but you can't come from the United States. Like,
so bad with the blue
yeah. So it's actually, in the beginning, like everybody else, so scary. And then we just felt more confident as things were getting better. And now it's just more like people, for the most part, act like nothing's happening. You know, a lot of the times and I'm not going to say I'm not guilty of this, because I was at a party recently. This woman I know turned 30 and we were at her party and we were partying up. We were not, you know what I mean? So it's like, and nothing happened to us. So I think that's the thing too, is that like, nothing's happening to people. So you're like, you start to let down more of your guard. I'm not saying that's the best thing in the world.
Yeah,
but
anybody in the US don't do that. I said anybody in the US don't do that.
yeah, exactly. Don't do it. But like we're in a special circumstance for sure, right? And I think also I'm sure this will happen to other people too, when they are able to interact with people. It's kind of like you let loose a little bit, because you're just like, finally, like, get this energy out and not feeling like I have to be so restricted all the time. But that's only because we were so obedient when it came to being restricted. We followed the rules, we got to a certain point where it was safe, and now we feel safer to be able to interact.
Is that Icelandic culture to follow the rules? Like, is it
That is so funny because I always like to laugh that Icelanders they like to break the rules.
Oh.
And yeah, and like for instance, it's not uncommon to see someone like parking on the sidewalk. You know, like there's like it's not always a continuous braking, but there's a lot of bending.
Okay.
And you know, Icelanders love being independent and being these people like, you know, a little bit rebellious, but there's certain rules that they really do want to follow. And ones when I feel like it's for the social good, those are ones, because like it's a small community. Everybody kind of knows each other. It's easy to get shamed, right? Like if you're gonna be that person, right? Like even if they don't do it in the news, like so it's a good chance that someone's gonna know who you are. So you don't really want to be that person, even though it happens, right? And in this case, it's like you don't want to be the person who's like, hey, aren't you supposed to be in quarantine? Like, you know what I mean? Like that type of individual. So
they call you out.
Like, I know you're not. What? So I'm not saying people didn't do it, but it's just for the most part, people really took it seriously and they were afraid too. And they didn't want to jeopardize other individuals. So, and I think that's what it comes a part of like a real society is when it's not just you. You're not just going, I only care about how, if I can go get a haircut. If I, like, we also didn't have these shops open that were not considered essential. You can only go to the supermarket. You could, you know, like whatever else. So people gave up a lot of their freedoms here in order for us to get to where we are, and that was crucial.
Yeah, and look where you guys are. You going to a party last week, and in the United States, like cases just continue to be like.
Yeah, because you want to party too soon.
Yeah.
Stop. Right? Like just wait.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's pretty amazing. So I just want to talk a little bit more about getting to like Iceland and what that process is like. I'm backtracking now, but I know it. I hear y'all because I get y'all DMs, y'all slide into my DMs. And I know y'all want to hear about like her immigration status. Now, guys, remember she is married to an Icelander, so that changes things. But I'm going to ask her right now. How did you actually legally move to? How did you actually legally move to Iceland? Because I get called out so often every time I release a podcast, and I don't ask that question. They come for me, girl.
Yeah. So, all right. So, like you mentioned, I'm married to an Icelander, and we actually got married in Iceland. So that part, at least the marriage license.
Okay.
But still, I had to go to the Directorate of Immigration, and you fill out a form that is based off of kind of your status. So if you're either living with an Icelander or
living, not married,
meaning like boyfriend and girlfriend, or sorry, partner.
Okay. Okay.
It could be any partnership.
Yeah.
Two consenting adults. So or married.
Okay.
That those are circumstances in which you can get your. It's not permanent residency, it's resident permit. So that's the first step is resident permit, which allows you to live in the country. And those can be either a year or 2 years long.
Okay.
And then you have to also show, so once you're putting out that form, in that form, it wants to know like, how are you going to support yourself? And so I had my contract for my job as showing like, this is how much I would be getting paid and, you know, whatever else. And then also like your passport and whatever. So you have to go to the Directorate of Immigration and give in that information and then they process it.
Okay.
As a person who's married, I was allowed to be in the country while they were processing that.
Oh.
I'm assuming, but don't quote me on this. I assume though it's similar with somebody who has a partnership in which they live with an Icelander as well. So as long as you can prove that, that is one way of doing it.
Okay.
Another way is if you have a specialized skill, which I do know people who are working here who are not connected to Iceland in any way other than they have a job. So one in particular works for a company called CCP, which is a gaming company, and they are a programmer, and they have a job there, and they're from the United States. They do not have any ties to an Icelander at all.
Do they speak Icelandic? Did they speak Icelandic coming into Iceland?
Nope.
Oh, y'all heard that.
And that's the thing, is like the only annoying part to that is if it's the case that they can find someone from the EU to do this same job as you, they would technically, you know, prefer that person over you because it's easier. If you live in the EU, you can just come straight to Iceland, pick up work, and you'll be fine. Like you don't have to go through all this other process. But as a person, or Schengen area as well. But as a person from the United States, there are more steps But it's a specialized skill. So like the fact that I have a job here, let's just say something were to happen, I'm a knock on wood, you know, and that good enough and I don't earn together anymore. But because I have been able to secure jobs in which for the most part those jobs didn't exist before I got there, I could be on a specialized, you know, visa for Iceland, and you know, so there are possibilities there. And then if you're also like a sports player, like there's all these things. But for me, that's how I went through the process, was my husband, and then filling out paperwork associated with that and showing them how I would support myself, which your partner could also be the person supporting you, but then they have to show documents that they do that.
And then how long was the process until you got actually your, I guess your residency card, or I don't know what?
Yeah, they say it takes 3 months, and I don't think it took that long for me, but this was 4 years ago. Okay. And now during COVID, things are taking way longer. So I'm in the process of getting my permanent residence,
okay,
which is like a 5-year permanent residence, and then you can apply for citizenship and all that. So, so I'm going through that process now, which is great. And all I really have to do is like show my taxes and stuff. Mm-hmm. But for some people I've heard right now they're waiting, and they had to extend it for resident permits because of COVID. So what would be like a 3-month process is becoming like 5 months or 6 months. Wow. But you're allowed to be in the country legally if you had already, if you were here at a certain date and your permit was valid past a certain date or something.
Okay. That's the exact same way it was in Guatemala as well. Like they were like, okay, nobody freak out. Like not getting nothing for a while, but like you can stay here and you'll be safe. Yeah. Different story in the United States, but let's not even start like going on the United States and all the confusion that's happening there. So I want to kind of wrap this up, but I want to give you an opportunity to kind of give some last thoughts to any Black woman who is sitting at home, either watching YouTube, listen to this podcast, or now I'm starting to transcribe these and put these on my blog as well, who is looking and like, I want to do this. Like, how can I, like, I ain't got no Icelandic man. I like tried, because Tinder, at least during the first part of COVID, had Tinder World where you could just pick a country and just swipe there. It was so much fun. Like, I ain't got no Icelandic man, but like what you talking about Iceland, like sounds hella dope. Like where would you tell them to start? Where would you tell them to start beginning?
Visit first.
Okay.
Right. So I mean, as much as it sounds so exciting, it isn't for everybody. And just like Guatemala isn't for everybody, right? Like I think it's really important to come to the place and visit, you know, get in contact with some people, kind of learn about what life is like here. You're getting one perspective from me, which I'm sure it makes it seem like a really appealing place. I'm happy about that. I don't want, you know, I don't feel like I need to make my story sound better than it is. It just happens to be really great. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful to be able to share that. But a part of that for me, I was, you know, still frightened coming to a degree because it's a new place, but also it's like dealing with weather, you know, or dealing with the language or stuff like that. Like these are crucial parts. And if you're going to move here on your own and not be connected to an Icelander, I have heard people who've had a hard time with that because it can be hard to penetrate into an Icelandic circle. Yes. So a lot of Icelanders have known their friends since they were like 5, right? So they were super close and they have all these stories that you don't relate to at all. It doesn't mean that you can't make friends with Icelanders. It just might be a little bit harder. Mm-hmm. And if you don't speak Icelandic, then you're like potentially at parties where people are just speaking in the language, you know, and they start out speaking in English to be polite, and then they just kind of go into their native language, right? So it is one of those, like, there are difficulties, but the only way you know is you got to experience it. And I felt really comfortable after coming many times and meeting people, and you know, and now I'm meeting even more people. Like it's funny how much that has changed in the last 4 years. So I was so focused on work all the time, and now I'm allowing myself to be a lot more social, and it's been nice to just hear so many other people's different stories.
No, that's so amazing. I have a daily gratitude practice, and part of it today is I'm just so thankful to be able to hear your story. And I want my audience to be able to follow you. So please, I'm going to put in the comment section and also just put below, guys, here, her social media handles, but just tell us what they are. Just so people can just stay in contact with you, follow your journey. Her Instagram page, guys, is hella interesting. So channel. So follow her, follow her, follow her.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm very grateful to be interviewed, and yeah, it's nice to be able to connect. So on YouTube, I'm All Things Iceland. On Instagram, I'm All Things Iceland. On Facebook, I'm All Things Iceland. On Twitter, though, I'm Jules Chambers. So it's like, just FYI, I'm not that active on Twitter. I do it, but I would say YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, those are my top 3. And then the podcast is also called All Things Iceland. I'm just All Things Iceland in the places to me that matters.
You got your digital branding, like you got it on lockdown. So I ain't mad at you. So again, like, thank you so much. I am so appreciative of you. I'm so appreciative of you telling your story. I'm so appreciative of you that's making time for little old me, because I feel like I do the same thing. I slide into people's DMs. I'm like, hi, I'm Jackie. I'm not crazy. Like, I try to like start it off with all these reasons why people like won't think I'm crazy or a Nigerian scammer, because I always tell people I got a Nigerian name. So sometimes like when I DM women, they're like, no, I'm not trying to get married to you. And I'm like, no, I just want to interview you for my show. I just want to interview you.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I was happy when I saw it. So I was like, oh, Jackie, oh, interesting. And then it's just, I was like, okay, yes, absolutely. And I love what you're doing. And I think it's so important because, like we talked about earlier, just like we create our own narratives. We are not, a monolith of Black women are blah, blah. We are everything we can imagine and more.
Yeah, we are. And I can't say anything after that because that's enough. So thank you so much. You have a wonderful evening, because it's evening for you. You really enjoyed this video, guys. And if you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. Take care and see you next time. And don't forget, you are magical and your life should be too. Peace out.
Hey, Black girl. Hey, you good? Because I'm fabulous. I'm a digital nomad, and my lifestyle allows my daughter and I to experience new places, culture, foods, and people. Living abroad and or traveling full-time is amazing. It is freedom. I can work from anywhere. I want more Black women to experience the same sort of freedom. I help Black women manifest their dreams of a life abroad or a full-time travel. Are you ready for a life beyond your wildest dreams?